perfección en la industria de la piratería. Producciones Shark. En MP3.
Ahí se menea, 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 se menea.
Hi, my name is Rafael, and today we are going to learn how to play chess. Chess has become a little popular recently due to some series and streamers, and it is also a great exercise for your brain, so why don't we give it a try? So first, you need to recognize the shapes and names of the pieces, so I'm going to show them to you very quickly. First, we have the rook, which has the shape of a castle. Then we have the knight, which has the shape of a horse. Then we have the king. You can distinguish it because of his hat. It has like a cross on it. Then we have the queen. You can recognize her because she has a crown, and her crown has like a little dot on it. Then we have the bishop. It is kind of similar to the queen, but it's shorter, and it also seems kind of thin, as you can see. Then we have the pawn, which is the shortest piece. You can recognize it because he has a big head. So yeah, in order to be able to play, you need to know the basic movement of each piece. So we're going to start with the king. The king can move to any square in any direction, but just one square. As you can see, here we have little dots on the squares that the king can go to. Can move in any direction but one square. So next we have the rook. The rook can move forward, up, down, left or right. It can move as far as you want in any direction, but only straight. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Next we have the bishop. The bishop can move as far as you want as well, but it can move only on its diagonal. As you can see, this bishop is dark colored bishop, so it can move only on the dark squares, and this one is a light square bishop, so it can only move on the light squares. Next one we have the queen. The queen has the moves of a rook and a bishop together, so it's a very powerful piece. She can go to all of these squares. So yeah, you really want to keep your queen alive in your game because it's very powerful. The next one is the knight. The knight has a special type of move because it can move on an L shape. As you can see, these are the squares that the white knight can go to. For example, here is the L shape that I was mentioning. You can move either one square and two squares to a direction, or two squares and one square to another direction. For example, this is 2 and 1, or we have also 1 and 2. So it depends on the way you see it, but it is always an L shape formed by 2 and 1 squares. So 2 and 1, or 1 and 2, or 2 and 1, or 1 and 2. It is kind of complicated at the beginning, but with the time you get used to it. So yeah, you can move in an L shape. The knight is very interesting. An interesting feature of the knight is that it can jump pieces. As you can see, these pieces doesn't stop the knight from moving. But on the other hand, the other pieces, if there are pieces on their way, they cannot go further. This rook cannot move further because it has pawns in front of it. But the knight is free. And last but not least, we have the pawn. The pawn might seem like a simple piece, but it's actually not. It has some special moves that you need to know. First, we are gonna cover the basic movement of the pawn. You can move the pawn only one square forward. It can never go back. It cannot move diagonally. It cannot move to the left or to the right. It can move only forward and one square. That's the basic movement of the pawn. Then we have a special condition. If the pawn hasn't moved from its initial position, you can move it 2 squares forward, like this. Now I cannot move the pawn 2 squares, so it only happens if it's on its initial position. Next, we have the promotion. When the pawn reaches the end of the board, you can promote it, which means you can change it to another piece. Any piece except the king or another pawn. You can make it a queen, a knight, a rook, or a bishop. Usually you will go for the queen, but there are some special cases in which you will choose a knight instead. There is no reason to choose a rook or a bishop. You will just go for the queen because it has the move of both pieces, as we already covered. Another special feature of the pawn is it doesn't capture as it moves. All the other pieces can capture in the same way they move, but the pawn doesn't work that way. As you can see, if I try to move my pawn forward, nothing happens. This other pawn is blocking its way. What I can do is capture this pawn, because the pawns capture diagonally, only one square. The same goes for the other party. I can move forward or I can capture this pawn. So yeah, this is the way the pawns capture. Now we're going to see two special moves that many beginners don't know, and they might freak out the first time they see them because they seem a little weird, but you're allowed to do them. First, we have the castle. In order to be able to do this, the king or the rook you're gonna use should have not been moved before. I'm going to show you the move because it's self-explanatory. As you could see, the king moved to the left 2 squares and the rook moved to the opposite direction to the king. This can be done to the other side as well. This is called short castle because the rook only moved 2 squares, but this one is called long castle because the rook moved 3 squares. And you might want to do it in your games. The last move that there is in chess is called en passant. It can happen only if you have these conditions. First, you need a pawn 1 square away from the initial position of the enemy pawns. So if I am white, I need my pawn on one of these squares. If I am black, I need my pawn on one of these squares. One square away from the initial position of the enemy's pawns. In order to be able to do this move, you need the enemy to advance one of his or her pawns forward 2 squares, like this. Or it could be this pawn as well, next to your pawn. So my pawn is here. If my opponent moves this pawn or this pawn 2 squares, I can capture this pawn like this with those conditions. It's the only way you can do this. So for example, if the enemy has this pawn here and I do this, they can capture my pawn like this. That will be it. I showed you how to move the pieces, so you can start playing now. You will need to practice a lot, but if you try it, you might enjoy chess because there's a huge community, there's a lot of history behind. Chess is a great game, so I encourage you to try it. Thank you for watching.